Hello there, this is VK3OTN, the official station of the Radio Amateur Oldtimers Club of Australia, with a monthly news broadcast for members and friends of the club for March 2026. This month, instead of the usual broadcast, we will offer an historical broadcast from years past. The usual news and information will be broadcast next month. I'm Andrew, the VK3 Charlie Alpha Hotel. I have broadcast files going back as far as 2001. Many of the older files aren't the greatest as far as technical quality goes, archived in either Real Audio or Windows Media Audio format. These produced a smaller file size back in the days when the leading edge technology was dial-up internet. Remember that? This month we have an original broadcast from April 2003. Details on when to hear these news and information broadcasts are available at the club website www.raotc.org.au. The VK3OTN is available on a wide range of radio platforms, HF, VHF and UHF, 2 metre repeaters, amateur television, DMR, that is digital mobile radio, and D-Star. These news broadcasts are available for download for up to 6 months, just in case you miss the original news broadcast from the RAOTC website. If you'd like to contact the club, then why not send us an email, raotc@raotc.org.au. I hope you enjoy this month's broadcast.
This is Alan Dave on VK3AMD and associated relay stations as VK3OTN, the official call sign to Radio Amateur Oldtimers Club of Australia. And first of all, we have a message from their president, Bill Roper, VK3BR, and here is what he has to say. Since the last news and information broadcast on the 3rd of March, every member of the RAOTC will have received the March 2003 issue of OTN magazine. However, if for some reason your copy did not arrive in the post in the last 3 weeks, please let me know as soon as possible. Due to an error by the printer, we are very short of copies of this March 2003 issue of OTN. However, if necessary, I will print a collector's version, that is, copies that are simply stapled at the top left-hand corner rather than stapled in the usual book format, to send out to any member who did not receive an original copy. Excuse me. For those members whose membership fees fall due this year, you will have read a notice printed on the address fly sheet of this issue of our OTN magazine, indicating that you should renew your membership by the end of this month, the 30th of April. If you're not sure whether your membership is due for renewal now, please drop me an email to the RAOTC email address of raotc@optusnet.com.au. I'll repeat that, raotc@optusnet.com.au. The twice-yearly published OTN magazine is a very tangible result of membership of the RAOTC, and members look forward keenly to each issue. OTN remains our most important medium of communication with and between members of the RAOTC. In fact, OTN is the lifeblood of the RAOTC. It provides the platform by which members can express their views and contribute articles of interest. However, are you supporting your magazine? When was the last time you submitted an opinion, a letter, a photograph, or an article to OTN? Our reserves of articles to be published in OTN is not as healthy as I would like it to be, and I appeal to members to support their magazine by submitting material for consideration for publication. Of particular interest is an account of your experiences as a radio amateur, whether they occurred 80 years ago or as recently as last month. The contribution can be as short as 100 words or as long as several thousand words. We all enjoy reading about other radio amateurs' experiences. Your contribution should be technical, an account of how you first became involved with radio, an unusual radio experience, a humorous incident, a cartoon, or your opinion on a radio matter, past or current. Also, we're always interested in reprinting suitable historical articles from the past. If you have read one you think would be of interest to your fellow old-timers, send a copy along to OTN. Photos, historical or current, of you, your radio equipment, stations and antennas are always welcome. We prefer to have high-quality scans of such photographs and in any popular graphics formats, but if you can only send along the original photograph, we promise to look after it and send it back to you as soon as practicable. Your contribution to your magazine can be submitted in a number of ways. The preferred way is by email to the RAOTC email address, which is again raotc@optusnet.com.au. However, hard copy sent to the Secretary of the RAOTC at 3/237 Gluff Road, Sandringham, Victoria 3191 is perfectly okay. We prefer manuscripts to be typed, but naturally handwritten manuscripts will be accepted also, provided we can read your writing. We're pretty good at that. Once again, I urge RAOTC members to support their magazine OTN with more articles and other contributions. I look forward to receiving your contributions soon. And that's all from me this month. Until next month, have a great time with this wonderful hobby of ours. And 73 from Bill Roper, VK3BR President. And thank you, Bill, for that message. And we certainly hope that members take note and follow up. And this month, it's a pleasure to be welcoming to club membership Harold Kraus, VK5HK, as full member number 1275. Roscoe Hammond, VK3KRH, as associate member number 1276, and Roscoe is relaying us on 1.843 megahertz AM right now. And it's with regret we note the passing from us of Sid Ward, VK2SW, who was member number 927, Les Daniels, VK2AXZ, who was member number 1053, and Alan Wall, VK6JB, who was member 970. We pause now for a few moments in memory of these departed friends. And here we go again. Here in Melbourne, our March luncheon was well attended, and we had a very interesting talk on our chosen subject of Morton Army communications. This was presented by an experienced warrant officer from the Australian Defence Forces School of Signals at Simpson Barracks. At McLeod, the subject was presented very well with many illustrations and followed by many questions. In Adelaide, many of our members will attend the Anzac Day reunion luncheon at the Marion Hotel in Marion Road, Mitchell Park, tomorrow week, Tuesday the April the 15th, starting at 12 noon to lunch at 12:30. Firm booking should be made by Saturday the 12th with either Jack Townsend, VK5HT, phone 82952209, Radine 5RK, phone 82715401, or Ron Coate, VK5RB, phone 82966681. And in VK6 land, our members and friends will have their usual convivial lunch at the Bayside Tavern on Tuesday, April the 15th. And we have a last-minute news flash from Clem Patchett, VK6CW and VK6ATN, in which he advises that due to eyesight problems he feels unable to carry on the work involved in the use of the VK6ATN call sign. He's seeking another RATC member to take over the call sign and the work it involves. He's done a great job for us over the years, and we wish him well. We certainly do wish you well, Clem. I hope you're listening this morning. This is VK3OTN, and Rex Newsom, VK4LR, who joined us recently as member number 1259, has this to say. Let me introduce myself, Rex Newsom, VK4LR, as a new member of the RAOTC. Yes, I do rate an asterisk, as I received that call in 1950 due to being born with mild cerebral palsy, which meant I could not walk straight or handle a pencil. I was excused from attending school. Instead, I played happily under our house with bits of wood and whatever tools I could purloin from my father's collection or elsewhere. Soon a collection of old batteries, wires, condensers and valves left behind by radio servicemen were added to my collection. These were all very mysterious, but I became determined to find out what they all were and how they were made. The rot set in when an army man about 1944 gave me a variable condenser, a roll of wire and a pair of headphones. He said I could build a crystal set with these, but disappeared before he could tell me how. After many weeks of frustration, scanning whatever books I could find, I finally got results. The local station that could be heard some 15 feet away. My meagre pittance from delivering a few newspapers went on buying radio and hobbies each month, and a reel valve and components for a little gym. After getting my mum to write to that famous store in Sydney and an anxious wait, the package arrived. After a gym tech assembly with my shaky hands and a blunderbuss soldering iron, it was ready to try. It was then I learnt my first lessons. Filaments do not go well when connected to B+. Enthusiasm not dampened, I pressed on to eventually build a radio and hobby's 5-valve radio. In fact, it did work, but only after being rewired by a local radio shop. Then, in delving around on the shortwave bands, I discovered that there are such things as radio amateurs, and indeed that there were some in my town of Townsville. I then became a sort of local pest, turning up at various times and staying resolutely deaf to suggestions that perhaps I'd better be elsewhere. On hitting the right age, I set out to inquire an amateur license. The theory was not a problem, but the snags were the written exam and the Morse code. Since I could not write or flap my fist at the required speed, it was apparent that passing the RAOTC was not going to be easy. However, by insistent letter writing, I managed to persuade the authorities to let me sit a special exam given by the local radio inspector. He asked the questions and I answered. The Morse test was a different kettle of fish, since without the ability to write down what was sent, it was difficult to remember what had been sent. But the radio inspector was sympathetic, and after sweating it out and with generous hints, I was deemed to have passed the special test. My license came a few weeks later, with the specification that it was a special issue, and in view of my physical disability condition, I would be limited to a final plate voltage of 250 and a current of 100 milliamps. 10 watts, presumably 250 watts was considered safe. But hey, I was away with 10 watts of AM and the call sign of VK4LR. This materialized as a Class C807 driven by a crystal oscillator, and the final was modulated by a pair of 807s. In 1954, my assembly skills had improved enough to enable me to hit the air with 10 watts of duck talk, as the ancient modulation guys called it. It was generated by a homebrew facing exciter driving the old 807 final change to Class AB2. In 1958, I was persuaded that I could possibly gain interest at university. As I was an adult, all I needed was passes in a few sub-senior high school subjects. After a year of night studies, I gained the necessary qualifications with Dr. Brisbane and University. My outer activities, therefore, were suspended, but not my license. I returned to the area in 1971 after consolidating my academic career, finding a wonderful XYL and building a QTH. My first commercial transceiver, an FT401, came in 1973, since I had noted that in the yearly license renewal, the 10-watt limit had been forgotten and no longer applied. Since then, my shack has grown to include a small stack of transceivers and a collection of vintage boat anchors. These include an HRO and a Collins 75A4. There's also a growing collection of vintage radios, mostly from the 1920s. I retired in 1977 as a senior lecturer after teaching at a local university for some 30 years. I guess I owe much to this rise in status to the opportunity given to me by amateur radio and to the support given to me in the early days by so many local amateurs, most of whom are now silent keys. Thank you, Rex. We like stories like this. They're very much along the line of what our President Bill was asking for right at the beginning of this very broadcast. This is VK3AMD, is VK3OTN. And further to Wesley Philpott's story of the development of the Forest Commission radio, it's fitting that we now have a story from none other than our Secretary, Arthur Evans, VK3VQ, about his experience as a volunteer amateur radio operator in the bushfires of 1939. And here's what Arthur has to tell us about that. The recent bushfires and smoke haze over the past weeks brought back messages of Black Friday, January the 13th, 1939. The writer and Arthur Tinkler, VK3ZV, who's now a silent key, had decided we would have a camping holiday in January 1939 and also try and see if we could operate portable while we were away. The date set was Saturday the 14th of January, and to this end I proceeded to modify my transmitter to work off the car battery. Having got our licenses toward the end of 1937 and being rather short of funds, I was earning the enormous amount of $1 a week. Our equipment had come mainly from the second-hand shops in the old eastern market. We could not afford anything exotic. However, I did buy a vibrator unit to get the power for HT, and the rig, which was breadboard style, consisted of a 6A6, 6P6, and 6D6, which gave us approximately 10 watts on CW and about half that on AM phone. Sorry, I needed a cough. Carrying out tests with Ted Jenkins, VK3QK, is also now a silent key, found out that it put out a reasonable signal, and so we had a ridgepole tent, a water bag, camp stretchers, and a Coolgardie safe, which had fit in the back of my Morris 840 Roadster, and all was ready. And we made up 2 dipoles, one for 40 meters and one for 20, and used standard electrical picks and speeders, twisted. The week before we were due to leave, however, saw the worst bushfires in Victoria's history, and the whole area around the Dandenong, Warburton, Hillsville, Omeo, etc. was aflame, with temperatures well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit and strong northerly winds. Melbourne was totally covered by smoke from the fires all week, and on the Friday it was 114 degrees Fahrenheit with wild northerlies. By this time we had more or less decided it was not a good time to go camping, but on Friday night we had a phone call from the WIA saying that they had heard we had portable gear and would we consider going into the New G area to establish communications. We did not feel very confident about this, but felt we had to give it a go, and so we said yes. I might add here that other amateurs had also volunteered to go to various places to do the same thing. Friday night saw thunderstorms and heavy rain over the fire areas, so by the time I had packed the car and picked up VK3ZV at Hampton on Saturday morning, the weather had mostly improved. So we proceeded along the Gippsland Highway and turned off the road to New G near Warrigal. On both sides of the road were eucalyptus trees about 250 feet high and all still smouldering. The railway line, which also followed the road for some of the way, had smoke coming from the wooden sleepers. Not a very safe feeling driving along in the little Morris with the hood up. When we got to the town of New G, it was devastation. The pub was brick and still standing, but there was very little else. The whole population spent most of the time in the river. Anyway, we found activity around what was left of the station building, and inside were 2 telegraphists, one the railway one and the other the postmaster. And they had set up communication using the sounder equipment. The railway telegraph was installed when the line was built in the 1800s and used 8-gauge galvanized steel wire, and it still worked back to Warrigal, whereas the PMG copper telephone circuits had just melted away. Anyway, we could see we could not really help and were only more of a nuisance. So we decided to continue on our way and proceeded back through smouldering trees, etc., and on to Lakes Entrance where we pitched camp. That evening we had a QSO with VK3GB and VK2AEU on 40 meters before turning in for the night, so the rig worked. In the morning, we decided that our current position was not much good, so we backed up, deciding to find a better spot. However, one thing led to another, and we headed off down the South Gippsland Highway until we saw the sign Woodside and headed down there. It was a sand track which led us to the 90-mile beach at Woodside. All that was there was a shelter with a corrugated iron roof which had a gutter that directed all the rainwater to a corrugated iron tank. However, there were quite a few coastal banks here very suitable for an antenna, and so we decided to stay. This is VK7RDR. After putting up the tent, etc., and the antennas, we were pretty hot, so we went for a swim on the 90-mile beach before coming back for a meal and seeing what we could work on 40 or 20 metres. We could hear absolutely nothing, and after trying to work out what could be wrong, we decided to turn in for the night. In the morning, we were up early, and after a swim, tried again on both 20 and 40 with the same result. We could not find any fault in the rig, so after further discussion, decided there was no use staying. We'd proceed back to Churchill Island off Phillip Island and call in and see Ted Jenkins, VK3QK, and stay there for the rest of the week. We then proceeded to pack up the tent, etc., but on pulling down the antenna, we found them soaked in salt spray, and the twisted leads were so wet you could literally wring them out. It was then quite obvious that salt spray from the ocean came over the sand dunes and just soaked the leads so they were useless. Anyway, we had a pleasant break with VK3QK, but learned quite a few lessons from the trip. Firstly, if you're going away, you need a lot more preparation than we had. And secondly, you need a much better idea of your equipment and what is required for portable operations. In all future operations, portable, I knew we were far better organised and had far better success. I was relating this episode to two of my grandchildren recently, and they listened with interest. When I finished, the youngest said to me, "Why didn't they use their mobile phones?" At that point, I gave up. But it did highlight to me how communications have advanced by leaps and bounds since World War II. It's very hard to explain to the young how it was, however. The current CFA had its beginnings as a result of the 1939 fires. It was obvious that an organised approach was essential, and communications were also essential. Today we have a very efficient organisation, and while it isn't possible to prevent bushfires, it is possible to save both lives and properties from the worst of the fires. Amateur radio had a pioneering part in its early development and can still provide operators who are experienced in controlling radio communications in cases of emergency. Thank you, Arthur, for that, and perhaps some of our members were involved in the recent savage fires in several states, and hopefully will send us in their story. Let's hear from you. This is VK3AMD. This is VK3OTN. The March issue of Ink Hammer Inc., the official newsletter of the Australian Special Wireless Group, contains an article which interested me greatly for reasons which I will explain. Meanwhile, the article, which was written by Dennis Shanahan, reads as follows. Every evening, for 74 years, the last post has been sounded under the Menengate Memorial in Wipers in Belgium as an expression of thanks from the Belgian people to those who died defending their villages and farms. It is a simple and moving ceremony and has been maintained since 1928 by a band of buglers from the local volunteer fire brigade. The task of preparing in rain or bitter cold is shared by 7 buglers, some of whom are the sons and grandsons of the original band. Your simple dedication has been honoured by visits from Pope John Paul II, Mother Teresa, and fundraising pop star Bob Geldof. Today, John Howard, his father and grandfather, both fought in the Western Front, will visit at sundown to hear the last post. That's not our Prime Minister. Two of the buglers, Antoine Berchute, a retired health insurance worker who's been on the Menengate roster for 48 years, and Albert Bakuta, who works with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission at Wipers, has been part of the ceremony for 39 years, and will both receive the Order of Australia from the Prime Minister. I'm sorry, I said something wrong about John Howard back there. I apologise. Like others in the band of volunteer firemen, the two men will receive recognition for self-sacrifice and remembering Australian soldiers who died in the war. In granting the Order of Australia medals, the Government House spokesman said, the Men and Gate Memorial has come to represent ideals of courage, self-sacrifice, duty and service to one's country. Mr. Berkuta and Mr. Berkuta have exemplified these ideals through their own form of self-sacrifice and duty. They have, by participation in the daily public ceremony, been ambassadors for their country and peace. The leader of the Last Post Buglers, Guy Gruers, the grandson of one of the founding members of the Last Post Association in Wipers, had already been awarded the Order of Australia. And Mr. Berkuta, who is being honoured today, met his wife at the ceremony of the 10,000th standing of the Last Post. Now, back in 1978, I received the QSL card from ON7FF. It was no ordinary QSL card. It measures 35 centimetres by 25 centimetres and reads, discerned to VK7RDR 25th of April 1978, for which I was contact number 321. And the card is the Flanders Fields Award, hence the suffix FF, from the Radio Club of Wipers, which, like the people in the article, celebrates the Anzac Day on April 25th. On Anzac Day each year is a tribute to the memory of Australian soldiers who fought and died for the people of Wipers in World War II. A red poppy is part of the colourful card design. And the same issue of Ink Ink has a little paragraph that reads, when NASA first started sending up astronauts, they quickly discovered that ballpoint pens would not work in zero gravity. To combat this problem, NASA scientists spent a decade and $12 billion developing a pen that writes in zero gravity, upside down, underwater, on almost any surface, including glass, and at temperatures ranging from below freezing to over 300 degrees C. It's said that the Russians used pencil. This is VK3AMD and VK3OTN. A small book about activities of a group of women in little-known French Australian Army signals has come into my hands recently. These women were trained to operate Wheatstone high-speed telegraphy machines which linked Australians to Port Moresby by undersea cable from Cape York. Their experiences were in many ways similar to those whose stories were told about the top-secret Carter Code operators in Jean Hillier's RAAF book, No Medals in This Unit. The title of this book is A Special Job, The Wheatstone Girls, 1943 to 1945. It's penguin size, 122 pages, compiled and edited by June Kirby, published by Seaview Press at Henley Beach, South Australia, ISBN number 17400800122, repeat, 17400800122, recommended retail price $15, it was printed in 1999. The copy I have read was loaned to me by Jean Hillier, the author of No Medals in This Unit, and I'm happy to report that the author, June Kirby, has presented the Army Signals Museum with a signed copy a few days ago. If you would like a copy, it can be obtained from the author, June Kirby, whose telephone number is 0395802885. Repeat, June Kirby, 0395802885. This is VK3AMD and VK3OTN. And I'm told that a college professor who was previously a sailor was very aware that ships are spoken of as she and her, and he often wondered what gender computers should be referred to as. To answer that question, he set up two groups of computer experts. The first was comprised of women, the second of men. Each group was asked to recommend whether computers could be referred to in the feminine gender or the masculine gender. They were asked to give 4 reasons for their recommendation. The group of women reported that the computers should be referred to in the masculine gender because, in order to get their attention, you have to turn them on. They have a lot of data, but are still clueless. You're supposed to help you solve problems, but half the time they are the problem. And as soon as you commit to one, you realise if you'd waited a little longer, you could have had a better model. The men, on the other hand, concluded that computers should be referred to in a feminine gender because, 1, no one but the creator understands their internal logic. 2, the native language they use to communicate with each other computers is incomparable to anyone else. And 3, even your smallest mistakes are stored in long-time memory for later retrieval. And 4, as soon as you make a commitment to one, you find yourself spending half your paycheck on accessories for it. On that happy note, I'll leave you to our next transmission on the first Monday of May. Thank you for listening to 73. This is Alan Doble, VK7RDR VK7RTV, going clear, and in a few moments I'll stand by for calls on 2 meters.
Thank you for listening. This now concludes our session for this month. And if you think a band is dead, then give a few CQs. You never know who is out there listening until you push that push to talk button. This is VK3OTN, the station of the Radio Amateurs Old-Timers Club of Australia, saying 73, and listening now for any check-ins and callbacks. However, some of our relay operators may not be able to take a callback. So if you have any issues that you would like to mention, please email them to us at raotc@raotc.org.au.